Aloha. This is another test video to see if the algorithms of YouTube are gonna be able to push us underneath 12,900 subscribers again. For those who pay attention to like the stream of videos that come along when I mention the last time the subscriber count, I think the highest was like 12,916 or something like that. And that was like a week or two ago. And then I made a couple videos and it dropped below 12,900. And then it worked its way back up over the next week or two. And now, and just before the last video, it was at 12,913. So it made its way back up. And then after the last video last night, it's back to 12,903. So, yeah, huge difference from like years ago when it was like 100 subscribers a day or something like that. It was something like that. But anyway, this quick video is just to, it was just a quick thought just last night that relates to movements and generations and mind control. To boil it all down, the people that are alive today and speaking today are not the same people, or are not the same consciousness that we were back in the 60s. Back in the 60s, the consciousness of our ancestors back then were, their main approach that they were attempting to do was to at least get the conversation up to the baseline of equality. Because in the eyes of the white supremacists who were running the governments, we were less than human. We were animals. We were like less than animals to so-called white people. So the only thing that was in reach, in arm's reach, that our ancestors could reach for at that time was to reach for equality. And that was exactly what the system wanted to do. For the people, the masses of people, to ask the government to approve their equality, to approve their existence, which is what makes that system God and King over you. When you ask the authority to do something for you, you're asking the authority to remain in charge of you or in control over you. So when you see images like this, and when you see the movie Selma, produced by Hollywood, to emphasize that whole equality approach, what they're doing is that they're saying that they are gods and kings, and the only way that you can get close to what we are doing here in this new world, white supremacist world, is to get our approval, is to ask for our approval. So these images, these symbols like the stars and stripes, the flags, this represents a national consciousness, a national thinking, nationalistic type of thinking that so-called black people in the United States were not even allowed to be a part of in their own land. We were still considered 3/5 of a human being, basically less than animals. You couldn't even look at a white woman or you would get lynched. These are the things that get downplayed. Alligator bait, like this is all the rules and the laws that get downplayed by people who try to say like everything is about the Jews and all this other stuff. No, it wasn't the Jews who, you know, lynched and mutilated Emmett Till. It wasn't the Jews who carried out the actions of the Jim Crow laws. There might have been an intelligence behind generating these laws and generating these actions, but the actual actions that were carried out, the actual lynchings, the bombings of Black Wall Street, the actual bombs were dropped by white supremacists, not by the Jews. They were dropped by the people. The same way the people who are receiving the benefits, the privileges from white supremacy today are not all the Jews. It's the so-called white people who are quietly accepting and loving their benefits that they're getting, their privileges that they're getting from the system. They are privileged by their birth over another individual to be privileged, like to live as like a god, a minor god in this realm. So our people, our ancestors that predate this so-called new world are very well aware of our relationship to the Most High and this realm and so on and so forth. We have been and are very aware of this. The generations of today who were birthed out of that asking consciousness, that asking of authority consciousness in the 60s and 70s, this generation today is no longer asking. We are of that most high consciousness, and we are no longer asking for nationalistic equality. We are seeking justice, nothing less. This is the difference between the movements and revolutions of previous times. Previous movements in like the world wars and all these other things. See, you can see that as like our people were fighting for imaginary wars, for wars that were generated out of the same mentality that creates like Hollywood and so on and so forth. So the same way people are protesting and making movements, asking the authority figures for civil rights, is the same kind of manipulative consciousness that makes people fight wars and join the military for authority figures that have none of their well-being, none of their, they don't care about them in any kind of way. You are less than an animal. You are a number to be utilized to expand the power of this authoritarian empire around the world. You are nothing more than that to them. So back then, this was the civil rights movement was designed to, excuse me, it was designed to generate this atmosphere of revolution that is based upon a nationalistic evolution, to evolve the nationalistic United States New World identity, to make it more human. This is what they had to do. They had to use the so-called black people to make so-called white people look more human, because they were actually acting in the most inhumane ways. Lynching, bombing, burning, destroying, and still doing this shit today. But the Civil Rights Act wasn't to give black people, so-called black people, civil rights. The civil rights movement was designed to humanize so-called white people. This is another approach that we do not see. The civil rights movement had nothing to do with voting rights. The civil rights movement had everything to do with convincing people, attempting to convince the rest of the world that the consciousness of the so-called white people in the United States, in the government of the United States, to convince the rest of the world that it not only is humane, but it's not inhumane. Those are two different things. To convince one that you are humane and to convince another that you are not inhumane. Those two things needed to be happening. And the soul essence is the same way they use black people in movies and all that other shit. They used them in the revolutions, in the movement, the movie of revolution, the movie of the civil rights movement, the movie that was that movement that was projected to the rest of the world. That's why the civil rights movement was generated to do what it was doing. So in this, you have mixtures of all the different storylines. And then what happens is that the stream, the mainstream that dictates where these movements should go. They, as long as you're asking powers to change, your revolution is based upon who you're asking, the authority you're asking. So you're really not moving anywhere. You're not really saying anything. This is the difference between our people today and the people back in the day. Not because we're like way amazing and they were shit. No, saying this because the consciousness of the individuals today and the consciousness of the experience today is different than the consciousness of the experience in the individuals of yesterday and the movements of that time. What needed to be said and what needed to be done was what they did at that time. Yes, there were people saying what we're saying today as far as like coming from the space of the Most High, acknowledging the justice and the injustices that need to be spoken about. There weren't, I'm not saying that there weren't people back then saying what we're saying today. What I'm saying is that the overall movement back then was projected to the rest of the world, and that was utilized. It was manipulated the same way the Occupy movement was manipulated. And not to say that the Occupy movement wasn't created by the system in the first place. It's just to say that when they try these plans here and there, they don't always work. So what happens is that they seed little revolutions and little plans here and there, and whatever one kicks off and jumps off with enough energy, that's the one that gets manipulated and infiltrated and used to affect the people. So in the beginning of Occupy, people didn't really give a shit. Nobody paid attention. But as soon as Occupy jumped off and started to be like it was a face-off between hundreds of our people and, you know, the police departments from all over Northern California. Once, you know, we started to have our tents burned and destroyed, and you had police looking like military soldiers walking down the streets and throwing tear gas and flashbang grenades at us, and it was helicopters, you know, filming the whole thing, and you had a group of people who was circling around downtown Oakland and coming back for more and more, getting hit with tear gas and flashbang grenades 4 times over. When you have people doing that, that's an actual fucking war. When you have people doing that, you're having people say, no, fuck you. We don't give a fuck what you do. You can call every single police officer in the world over here. It's not going to change the storyline of what the fuck is going on in the system. Once Occupy hit that point, and it only hit that point in Oakland, once it hit that point, that's when it was televised to the world, because the mainstream media knew it could utilize it to push this kind of synthetic movement that was still based upon asking the so-called powers that be for change. So it was no different. The Occupy movement energetically was no different than what the civil rights movement was. Asking the system for change. No, what we are saying now in this moment is that we are empowering ourselves to acknowledge the change that is needed, and we are doing it ourselves. And will no longer be limited by the bullshit that is put out by the system. And we don't give a fuck about your stars and stripes around the world. None of the flags around the world. This is not to say destroy all the borders and all that other stuff. This is to say reconnect with your ancestors. Reconnect with the land. That predates the borders of this nationalistic bullshit. We don't give a fuck about your flag. We care about our people and the land. Your gesture alchemy of distracting us from the original storyline will no longer be accepted. There is a justice that is coming down, that is backing us, that the system is completely unaware, not completely unaware of, but they are not coming from that same energy field. They are not pulling the same kind of energy that we are pulling from, because they are pulling from a different frequency. the civil rights movement time frame peoples were pulling from a frequency of energy that was still heavily linked into the system of racism, white supremacy, by way of asking the government for change, asking anybody for change on a nationalistic level. When you're doing that, you are in that same moment disempowering yourself. These are the mistakes we are no longer making. But the system wants you to make these mistakes. So it wants you to revamp the civil rights time frame thing and start asking for equality today. So this is why they tie in the equality of the women's equality, the equality of the LGBT equality, because they are saying that they are the authority figures of the standards of this universe. The gods and kings who have ownership over you made themselves out to be the standard. Joe Rogan, Bill Nye, Neil deGrasse Tyson, they're scientific, evolved from a monkey to them right now. And the way they're telling you what they're telling you is to say that they are the standard. They are what you should strive to be like. When white people put themselves in movies over and over and over again, and then they project it to you and your children, that ain't got nothing to do with you. They are projecting white supremacy onto you as the standard for this reality. This is an illusion. This is a sorcery. This is a sorcery that both disempowered people and empowered people who couldn't take it, they just shut down. They just shut down. But the people who were privileged by it, look at this lady's face. Look at these women's faces. These are the people who have been empowered by racism, white supremacy. A lot of these people are still alive today. And you best believe their children are still alive today. And their grandchildren are still alive today. And these motherfuckers are the ones that are in your offices, your political offices, making decisions on a large scale. Her face, these women's faces, like all the people who benefited from and were yelling on the streets as if white privilege was a God-given right. That shit ain't got nothing to do with the Jews. The acts carried out by the individuals were not manipulated. They were not like moved. The arms, the energy, the strength pulling the ropes of that of that noose up the tree with that indigenous man in that noose. The strength pulled on that rope over that tree branch or that tree limb. That strength wasn't so-called the Jews doing it. Yeah, they might have been involved in the overall mind control, but the actions carried out were done by a particular group of people. And this is why the scapegoat of the Jews gets thrown out into your face and constantly pinged over and over again. Look at these videos. You'll see people going through here over and over again telling you you're wrong because you're not, focusing all of your attention on the Jews and the Freemasons and the Illuminati and all that other stuff. Like all the little games that people want to get distracted by and they think they have the answers for everything. They want you to be distracted by it too. Like, no, picture's bigger than that. Some things are meant to attract attention. Some things are meant to distract attention away from something. Some things are meant for both. So this is what I'm saying. When you read the comment section, you see stuff like that, you're going to see people doing that all the time because they have nothing else to do. When they're making comments like that, they're sharing their best case interpretation of what you're talking about. And they always end up revealing their own limitations. So this is what I'm talking about, the atmosphere. We don't give a fuck today. We don't give a fuck about your country, your government. That was an illusion in the first place. Look at this shit. This is a mind control we are not falling for.